Anybody here have gable vents that leak when the wind blows? This one is from Curie Beach. If you'll notice that gable vent on the top of the roof here has a string on it. Every time it blows real hard, he goes in the attic and yanks on it and closes the vent. So gable end vents are nothing new. They've been around a long time. If you look at the older beach houses, a lot of them have funny things around the gable vents for good reason. And one of the requirements for this bronze level is that you deal with gable vents because they're known to be such high leak prone areas. So at the bronze level, if you're not re-roofing, you can't do the extra roof nailing, you can't do the secondary water protection because it's under the roof, the existing roof covering, and you've already got a roof covering on that, so you can't do it. Therefore, the discounts are not as good. You can do the roof attachment vents, and you can reinforce the gable ends from inside the attic. Now, the next slide. You can attach the roof with some effort from the inside, and the next picture shows a way that you can do that. It's actually a foam, a urethane foam that's sprayed on to every rafter and every seam all the way through the roof. And you can make it mostly waterproof from underneath. But because the roof slope makes it extremely difficult to get to the eaves, it's not an easy process. It's relatively expensive, far more expensive than if you're re-roofing. And I don't think it's going to become a practical alternative. If you really want to be a fanatic, and I'm pretty close, you can look at this method, but my guess is we won't see a lot in North Carolina. Most of it will be done when re-roofing. Next slide. Okay, the silver requirements are all the bronze. It has to have full impact glass and opening protection. And one of the things for both the state requirements and these fortified requirements is that you cannot use plywood installed shutters to qualify. But it has to be tested by a third-party testing agency, and plywood isn't going to qualify, even though it's allowed by the building code. And frankly, I'm not real sure that's a good idea. If it's in the code, I suspect it ought to be credited. But the way they've set the initial program up, that's not going to be the case. You're going to have high-wind garage doors. New doors would usually qualify for that. And there's some kits that you can add to existing doors to beef them up. They're a known problem I'll show you a couple pictures of. There are more grable reinforcements that have to go in. And one of my pet peeves is improved porch and carport anchorage. It's a real common problem that's proven to be a real serious problem in North Carolina. In the next slide, the consequences of a broken window are far more than just the water blowing in through that particular window. That's certainly a significant cause of damage, but a more serious problem is it creates internal pressures inside the building that push up on the roof and out on the walls, and that's beyond the design requirements of an enclosed building like the North Carolina building code requires. Next slide. That goes for doors. You can do that with impact-resistant glass, or you can do that with storm shutters as long as the underlying doors are pressure rated. Next slide. Next slide. Is it asleep? Okay, garage doors. Big wide doors, big hole. Once you get that big an opening broken open, when the door fails, and they're notorious for bending beyond the capacity of the outside frames, and you put an extreme load on the roof above it, and that's a major cause of damage when the winds get up above 95 miles per hour, certainly anything above 100 miles per hour gust. Next slide. My favorite in North Carolina is porch roofs. We had a building code that goes back to the 1960s that's anchored the roofs throughout the walls, on the barrier islands anyway. But for some reason when contractors get to the porches, they forget all about those connection requirements. And after Hurricane Fran, I stood in one spot on Topsail Island and counted 12 porch roof failures. So if you're concerned about your wind resistance, the first place to start looking in North Carolina is probably at your porch. And one of the requirements for silver is to make sure that that's beefed up and adequately anchored. Next slide. Gold is going to be harder to obtain. The first two levels don't require any demolition, but you have proof of what is underlying in the piece that you can't see, because you've got to do a load path analysis looking at how the forces get from the top of the roof all the way through the building to the tip of the foundation pile. And in older buildings particularly, you can't do that without tearing something up. And once you tear it up, you may not like what you see, you may have to do a lot of work. Now, the good news for those of you that live on the beach, some of those things that are needed to qualify for gold have actually been common practice, but not necessarily in the building code. For instance, one of the things that will help you qualify is if you have an exterior or interior subsiding that goes all the way over the walls. That if you go in the inlet areas, it's been common practice to use something other than plywood or OSB for exterior sheathing or subsiding. And if that was done on the house and you can prove it, then that may save the cost of demolition and make it easier to qualify. And if you have a recent building, for instance, in the silver level, the impact resistance, that's been in the code for the first 1,500 feet from the water, from the ocean, since 2006, and since 2009, it's been a requirement for the entire barrier island all the way back to the intercoastal waterway. So some of those things are already built into brand new houses, if anybody was lucky enough to build a brand new house in the last couple of years. Next slide. So again, in this case, it's a load path issue. You've got to prove that you've got connections all the way from the peak of the roof to the bottom of the foundation. And the next slide. That's been, in many cases, common practice for a lot of the building code on the beaches going back in the 1960s after the hurricanes of the 50s. What may not be obvious is that most of the standards that have been common practice for the beach, both required and optional by contractors, didn't take effect on the mainland communities until the mid-1990s. So almost 30 years behind the beaches, the mainland communities caught up. So what may be routine in older houses in the beach community, as soon as you cross the waterway, you may not see those features for a much more recent house. Next slide. And in the IBHS discounts, the option one is without re-roofing, so the one you ought to pay attention to is option 2. So the initial level for bronze qualification is 8.6%. For silver levels, you got to have window protection to get that high, but that can be as high as 17.5%. The next slide has the gold and new. So you could get to 21% on the beaches and up to 24% on for new construction. Now, because of the secondary water protection that almost nobody has, it's relatively rare for anybody to walk in and qualify for the IBHS fortified houses. But to put the cost in perspective, I found at least 3 in North Carolina. One was a demonstration project by Clemson University. It's actually instrumented for hurricane wind forces. But the other 2 are in inner city Wilmington. One is a Habitat for Humanity house that was sponsored by Nationwide Insurance, and it's going to qualify for the 24% discount on their improvements. So how much will it cost you? Well, it's going to take a current condition report that the evaluator will have to conduct. If you have to do something to retrofit the building to bring it up to a higher standard, it could take a couple extra inspections that will be an added fee, and a final inspection to make sure everything was done after the fact. Plus, the addition to that will be any construction improvements. Now, one of the nice things about the program, if it works, is that it's supposed to advise you with an evaluation on what's likely to be cost effective and what is not. So it'll tell you what you immediately qualify for, what you can easily and cost effectively do to make the improvements, and what may not be cost effective and not worth worrying about. So the next slide. These are some costs prepared by the Institute for Business and Home Safety, and the low end of the cost would be that's $150 for the initial evaluation, and for the total is still $150 if they did it for free. And most of these evaluators are probably going to be home inspectors, so they may live nearby and not have to come far to do it, but obviously it's going to cost some labor if they have to come back multiple times. So I think this is probably an optimistic low end of the evaluation cost. In the next slide, it's increased to probably the high end, and that's $375. They used fine points. That's the kind of scale it may take to get evaluated. And since this is purely new, we don't have a track record here in North Carolina. It's going to take a while to sort out, but the first evaluations are starting about now, mainly because we've just gotten them trained to go into the field. Next slide. The bottom line of all this is be prepared. That there are lots of hazards out there, and we know about a lot of them, and this is one thing that can help save you some insurance money. There are a lot of good ideas in this program. Some of them are going to be easy to reach, some of them harder. But one thing is for sure, that if you're re-roofing, you ought to seriously look at the IBHS, secondary water protection and roof deck nailing, because you've got one chance to qualify in the next 20 years of the lifetime of that roof. And if you don't do it, then you may regret it a lot later. I'm glad to answer any questions from the board.
Commissioner, any questions?
The rest of it.
Audience, anybody have any questions? Floor is open.
Is the chart deck available to us? The chart deck, can we have copies of the chart deck? Yeah.
The chart deck, if you give me some information or email or mailing address,
Sure.
I can send you the parent details.
How about if you email it to the town hall,
Sure.
and they can put it on the website to make it available to everybody?
Good idea.
And the other thing we're in the process of doing is
An email it out.
we've got our third training session for the evaluators in Warden City in about a month. And on, I think it's the 28th, it's the last Thursday in May, we're planning a workshop for roofing contractors. So we want to explain to them what they have to do to qualify in advance. So hopefully they'll be knowledgeable if they come to you and try to market it. It will be an added cost, but like I said, we think it's going to be a very reasonable compared to the improvements that we have.
So if I understand it correctly, we would spend approximately $450 to get a $450 savings for the first year, and then the second year, the insurance companies increase their rates. So we're back to zero.
I'll leave that to the insurance commissioner. They won't touch that. But this is a quest I've been at for 33 years. It's been obvious incentives were necessary to improve wind resistance. And the fact that they're offering anything, even if it's not a perfect system, I'm happy to start with. It's going to be a learning experience for all of us. We're going to make it better in the long run, but this is a good place to start.
Anyone else? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll stick around for the rest of the meeting if any questions after the meeting.
Very good.
Thank you.